Captain Jack Harlow walked through the empty corridors of the ancient human warship CSS Vigilant. His footsteps echoed against the metal floors. The ship had been floating in space for nearly a century, preserved as a historical monument from humanity's early days of space travel. Jack ran his hand along the cold steel wall. Unlike modern ships with their sleek designs and holographic controls, the Vigilant was all physical switches, metal, and wires. He had studied vessels like this during his academy training, but seeing one in person was different. "Captain, the alien delegation is requesting permission to board," said Lieutenant Kim through his communicator. "Grant them access," Jack replied. "I'll meet them in the main hangar." Today was important. The Galactic Coalition's annual diplomatic summit was being held nearby, and Earth had offered tours of the Vigilant as a cultural exchange. Jack had been assigned as guide for the high-ranking visitors. When he reached the hangar, a sleek silver shuttle was just docking. The doors opened with a hiss, and out stepped 5 representatives from different alien species. Jack recognized Ambassador Zixthar of the Vespid Collective immediately. Tall, insect-like, with gleaming compound eyes and clicking mandibles. "Welcome aboard the CSS Vigilant," Jack said with a formal bow. "I'm Captain Harlow. It's my honor to show you this important piece of human history." Ambassador Zixthar's antennae twitched. This vessel was actually used in combat. "It seems primitive." Jack smiled politely. The Vigilant was the pride of Earth's fleet when it was commissioned. It fought in 3 major campaigns before humanity joined the coalition. The Mercurian representative, Admiral Vethkrol, stepped forward. His blue-tinged skin glistened under the hangar lights. "I've read about these early human warships. Fascinating how you managed interstellar travel with such basic technology." As Jack led the tour through the ship, the aliens examined everything with curious eyes. Their reactions ranged from polite interest to barely hidden amusement. "These are the main weapons systems," Jack explained as they entered the arsenal. "Railguns capable of accelerating projectiles to a fraction of light speed, nuclear missiles, and pulse cannons. Physical ammunition." Ambassador Zixthar made a chirping sound that Jack's translator didn't catch, but the body language was clear. The alien was laughing. How quaint. Like children proud of their first crude drawing. The other aliens joined in the subtle mockery. Jack maintained his diplomatic smile, though his jaw tightened slightly. "Outdated as they may seem," he said carefully, "these systems were quite effective in their time." They continued to the bridge, where rows of manual control stations surrounded the captain's chair. Everything was designed to be operated by human hands rather than AI systems or neural interfaces. "This is where the crew would command the ship," Jack explained. "Up to 20 officers would work here during battle stations." Admiral Vethkrol pressed a button experimentally. Nothing happened. "Is none of it functional?" he asked. "The ship is preserved in working condition," Jack replied. "Systems are powered down but could be reactivated if needed, part of our historical preservation protocols." As they finished the tour and returned to the hangar, Ambassador Zixthar turned to Jack. "Thank you for this educational experience, Captain. It's good to remember how far we've all come. Your species has advanced remarkably since these early attempts at space warfare." Jack nodded politely. Few remembered that the Vigilant had been a marvel of human engineering, or that it had been decommissioned not because of obsolescence, but as a gesture of peace when humanity joined the coalition. As the alien delegation departed, Jack remained in the hangar, looking at the old warship around him. Despite their polite words, he had seen the looks they exchanged. To them, the Vigilant was just a relic, a museum piece from a young species still finding its place among the stars. If only they knew what this old ship was still capable of. 3 days after the alien delegation's visit, Jack was sharing a meal with Science Director Laura Mitchell in the diplomatic station's cafeteria. They were among the few humans attending the summit. "I saw the footage of your tour," Laura said, stirring her coffee. Those Vespids weren't subtle with their mockery. Jack shrugged. Can't really blame them. By their standards, The Vigilant is ancient technology. Still, a little respect wouldn't hurt. That ship saved thousands of lives during the Proxima conflict. Their conversation was interrupted by a sudden alarm. The station's lights shifted to emergency red, and announcements began blaring in multiple languages. All representatives to the central chamber. Emergency session commencing in 10 minutes. Jack and Lara exchanged worried glances before rushing toward the meeting hall. They found the room already filling with anxious delegates from dozens of species. Admiral Vethkrol stood at the center, his blue skin now pale with stress. He activated a large holographic display showing a star map of nearby systems. "We've lost contact with the outpost in the Arcturus sector," he announced. The display zoomed in on a blinking red dot. All communication ceased 3 hours ago. Murmurs spread through the crowd. The Arcturus outpost was a major coalition defense station, home to over 5,000 personnel. "Perhaps it's a technical issue," suggested a delegate from the Taurian systems. "We thought so too," replied Vethkrol grimly, "until we lost contact with Outpost Sigma as well." Another red dot appeared on the map. "And our long-range scanners have detected these." The hologram shifted to show grainy images of ships unlike any Jack had seen before. They were crystalline in structure, with strange geometric patterns that seemed to shift and change as they moved. 15 vessels, approaching coalition space at high speed. They match no known signature in our database. Ambassador Zixthar stepped forward, mandibles clicking rapidly. "Have they responded to communication attempts?" "No. We've tried all standard protocols and received no response." Lara moved closer to the hologram, studying the unusual ships. "Those energy readings, they're unlike anything I've seen before." A communications officer rushed into the room and handed Vethkrol a datapad. The Admiral's expression darkened as he read. "We've just received fragmented transmissions from Arcturus before it went silent. They were attacked. The unknown vessels used some form of energy weapon that bypassed their shields completely." Panic spread through the room. The Coalition had faced threats before, but rarely something unknown that could defeat their defenses so easily. "What about our response fleets?" Jack asked. Vethkrol brought up another map showing the positions of Coalition warships. "That's the problem. Most of our combat vessels are scattered for the trade conference. The nearest battle group is 5 days away at maximum speed." "And these unknown ships?" Lara asked. "At their current trajectory, they'll reach this system in less than 2 days." The room erupted in frightened discussion. Some delegates were already calling for evacuation. Jack studied the tactical display, a cold feeling settling in his stomach. The diplomatic station had minimal defenses, designed only to deter pirates or small-scale threats. Against a fleet that could destroy military outposts, they were practically defenseless. Then his eyes drifted to the window, where the CSS Vigilant floated silently in space, illuminated against the darkness. "Admiral," he said, his voice cutting through the chaos, "I have a suggestion." Vethkrol looked at him skeptically. "Captain Harlow." "The Vigilant. It's fully operational." The Admiral's expression shifted from confusion to disbelief. "That museum piece. You can't be serious." "Very serious, sir. Its systems are different from modern Coalition vessels. If these unknown ships can bypass your shield technology, perhaps older defenses might give them pause." Lara stepped forward. "He's right. The Vigilant uses physical armor rather than energy shields, and my engineering team has experience with Earth's older systems." Vethkrol looked unconvinced, but as the room filled with more reports of approaching danger, Jack could see the Admiral was running out of options. "Let me try," Jack said firmly. "What do we have to lose?" Jack stood firm as the Emergency Council debated his proposal. The large chamber had grown louder with each passing minute, aliens from across the galaxy arguing over their limited options. "This is madness," Ambassador Zixthar chittered, mandibles clicking rapidly. "You want to rely on an ancient vessel that hasn't seen combat in a century." Admiral Vethkrol studied the tactical display showing the approaching enemy fleet. Captain Harlow, I understand your attachment to your species' history, but this is not the time for sentimentality. That ship is obsolete. With respect, Admiral, Jack replied, keeping his voice steady. Obsolete doesn't mean useless. The Vigilance systems operate on completely different principles than modern vessels. Lara stepped forward, her scientist's badge glowing on her uniform. The initial reports indicate these unknown attackers can somehow bypass our energy-based defensive systems. The Vigilant doesn't use those systems. Explain, demanded Vethkrol. Modern coalition ships rely on quantum field generators for protection, Lara said. The Vigilant uses layered titanium-carbon composite armor. It's physical, not energy-based. Jack nodded. And its weapon systems are primarily kinetic and explosive rather than beam weapons. They might be effective where our modern weapons fail. The Admiral's expression remained doubtful. Even if that's true, who would operate it? The control systems are human-specific and outdated. I can pilot it, Jack said. I trained on similar systems in the Academy's historical program. Lara added, my engineering team includes 5 humans with restoration experience on older vessels. We could have the main systems operational within hours. A hush fell over the room as a new alert sounded. The tactical officer, a Centaurian with 6 fingers on each hand, looked up from her station with alarm. The unknown fleet has increased speed. New arrival estimate, 20 hours. The room erupted again in panicked voices. Vethkrol raised his hands for silence. We have no real options, the Admiral finally said. The evacuation ships can only take half our personnel, and they would be defenseless if caught during transit. He turned to Jack. Captain Harlow, you have my authorization. But understand this, if you fail, everyone at this station could die. Jack nodded solemnly. I understand the stakes, Admiral. 30 minutes later, Jack and Lara led a mixed team of human engineers across the docking tunnel to the Vigilant. The ship's interior was dark, emergency lights casting long shadows as they moved through the corridors. Main engineering is 2 decks down, Jack said, leading them toward the central lift. The reactor has been in standby mode for decades, but the preservation protocols should have kept the core stable. Chief Engineer Maria Diaz examined a control panel, wiping away a thin layer of dust. Power systems first, then propulsion, weapons, and life support. We'll need to manually restart each section. We'll split into teams, Lara decided. Maria, take Ben and start on the reactor. Jack and I will head to the bridge and try to get the command systems online. As the engineers dispersed throughout the ship, Jack and Lara made their way to the bridge. The room was eerily quiet, the captain's chair sitting empty at the center. Do you really think this can work? Lara asked quietly as she began activating the main console. Jack ran his hands over the manual controls, feeling the solid switches and buttons beneath his fingers. Unlike the neural interfaces of modern ships, everything here required physical touch. It has to, he replied. This ship was built during humanity's darkest hours, when we faced extinction in the Proxima Wars. It was designed to keep fighting even when everything else failed. The console suddenly hummed to life, status lights blinking in sequence as ancient systems began to wake. Bridge to engineering, Jack called through the comm system. What's your status? Chief Diaz here. You won't believe this, Captain. The reactor's starting up clean. Someone maintained this old girl properly. We should have partial power in 20 minutes. Jack smiled as more systems began responding around the bridge. Let's get this relic ready for battle. The Vigilance corridors buzzed with activity as the hastily assembled crew worked to bring the old warship back to life. The sound of tools clanging against metal mixed with shouts between engineering teams. The ship, dormant for so long, now pulsed with renewed energy. In the engine room, Chief Engineer Maria Diaz wiped sweat from her forehead as she monitored the rising power levels. The fusion reactors glowed with a blue light, casting eerie shadows on the walls. Reactor 2 stabilizing at 68%, she called out. Ben, how's the cooling system? Lieutenant Ben Foster hung upside down in an access shaft, his hands deep in a tangle of wires. Almost there. These old manual pumps need physical priming. With a grunt, he twisted a large valve, and the sound of flowing coolant filled the chamber. Got it. Maria smiled as her display showed the temperature readings dropping to normal levels. Bridge, this is engineering. We have main power at 75% and climbing. All 3 reactors are online. On the bridge, Jack nodded with satisfaction. Good work, engineering. Keep pushing those numbers up. He turned to Officer Kim at the communication station. What's our status with the weapons systems? Frank reports the main railguns are operational, Kim replied. Missile bays 1 through 4 are responding. He's still working on 5 and 6. Lara emerged from under the navigation console, a small tool in her hand. Navigation is back online. The inertial guidance system is actually in perfect condition. These old mechanical gyroscopes were built to last. Jack moved to the captain's chair and pressed the ship-wide communication button. Attention all hands. This is Captain Harlow. In less than 15 hours, we will engage an unknown enemy fleet that has already destroyed 2 coalition outposts. We are the only defensive force available until reinforcements arrive. He paused, looking around at the bridge crew, all humans, all volunteers who understood they might not survive the coming battle. I know most of you had different jobs yesterday. Scientists, engineers, technicians, not soldiers. But today, you're the crew of the CSS Vigilant, and you're all that stands between thousands of innocent lives and destruction. I couldn't ask for better people beside me. Throughout the ship, the crew paused in their work, listening to their captain's words. In the armory, Weapons Officer Frank Alvarez was supervising the loading of the last kinetic rounds into the railgun system. His hands moved confidently over the controls, running diagnostics. Weapon systems at 92% functionality. Captain, he reported. These old guns still have plenty of punch. In the medical bay, Dr. Helen Ward organized the ancient but effective first aid stations. She had been a researcher at the conference, but had volunteered when she heard Jack's call for medical personnel. Medical is ready, Captain, she reported, though I hope we won't be needed. Back on the bridge, Jack studied the tactical display. The enemy fleet had maintained its course directly toward the diplomatic station. No communications, no deviation, just relentless approach. They'll be in range in 14 hours, Lara observed. The diplomatic station is evacuating all non-essential personnel, but that still leaves over 3,000 people who can't leave in time. Jack nodded grimly. Then we make sure those ships don't reach them. He activated the ship-wide communication again. All stations, prepare for combat drills. We need to remember how this old warrior fights. The ship shuddered as the ancient engines pushed to full power for the first time in decades. The hull creaked and groaned, but held firm as the Vigilant began to move out of its docking position. On the diplomatic station, Admiral Vethkroll watched through the observation window as the human warship slowly came to life. The dull metal hull now glowed with running lights, weapon ports opening along its flanks. Do you really believe that Relic can save us? Ambassador Zixthar asked, mandibles twitching nervously. The Admiral didn't answer immediately, his eyes fixed on the old warship as it began to accelerate away from the station. We're about to find out, he finally said. The enemy fleet appeared at the edge of the system like ghosts emerging from the darkness. 12 massive ships of crystalline design, their surfaces reflecting starlight in strange, shifting patterns. They moved in perfect formation, splitting smoothly into attack positions as they detected the diplomatic station. On the Vigilance bridge, the crew watched the tactical display with tense expressions. Those are bigger than we expected, Officer Kim said quietly. Each enemy vessel was nearly twice the size of the Vigilant, their unusual design unlike anything in coalition records. Jack studied the approach vectors carefully. They're spreading out to surround the station. Classic encirclement strategy. He turned to communications. Any response to our hails? Nothing, Captain, Kim replied. I've tried all frequencies, including some of our oldest protocols. They're either ignoring us or don't communicate the way we do. Jack nodded, his decision made. Helm, bring us on intercept course with the lead vessel. Full combat thrust. The Vigilant surged forward, its engines pushing to maximum power. The old warship vibrated around them, the deck plates humming beneath their feet. On the diplomatic station, alien representatives crowded the observation deck, watching as the single human vessel moved to engage the approaching fleet. Is your captain insane? Ambassador Zixthar demanded, mandibles clicking rapidly. One obsolete vessel against 12 advanced warships. Admiral Vethkrol stood silently, his blue hands clasped behind his back as he watched the tactical display. The Vigilant appeared as a small green dot moving toward the larger red formations. The Vigilant is powering weapons, reported a coalition officer. They're actually going to engage. Aboard the human warship, Jack addressed his hastily assembled crew. We have one advantage, unpredictability. They won't know what to make of us. He turned to Officer Kim. Deploy electronic countermeasures. Full spectrum, old-school interference patterns. Kim's fingers flew over the controls. Deploying ECM, flooding all frequencies with noise. She paused, watching her readings. Captain, they're scanning us. And now they're confused. Their targeting systems seem to be struggling to lock. Perfect. Jack smiled slightly. They're used to modern digital signals. Our analog systems are throwing them off. He pressed the ship-wide communication button. All hands, battle stations. Brace for enemy fire. The first enemy shots came moments later. Brilliant beams of energy that lanced through space toward the Vigilant. Several connected, the ship rocking violently as the impacts hit. Damage report, Jack called out, gripping his chair as the ship shuddered. Hull integrity at 89%, reported Lieutenant Foster from engineering. Their weapons are powerful, but not optimized for physical armor. The ablative plating is dispersing most of the energy. Their energy weapons aren't penetrating as deeply as they should, Lara observed, looking at the damage control display. Modern shields would have failed completely against that barrage. Jack nodded. As we suspected. They've developed their weapons to counter energy shields, not old-fashioned armor. He turned to weapons control. Mr. Alvarez, target the lead vessel. Prepare to fire main batteries. Weapons locked, Captain. Frank responded, his hand steady on the firing controls. Jack took a deep breath. Let's introduce ourselves properly. Weapons free. The Vigilant roared in response, railguns erupting with kinetic rounds that streaked toward the enemy at tremendous speed. Unlike energy weapons that could be deflected, these were solid metal projectiles accelerated to a fraction of light speed. The lead enemy vessel seemed unprepared for this form of attack. Several rounds punctured its crystalline structure, creating visible fractures along its hull. Direct hits, Alvarez called out, excitement in his voice. They're showing damage. On the diplomatic station, the gathered aliens watched in stunned silence as the antiquated human vessel scored the first successful hits against the invaders. Impossible, whispered Ambassador Zixthar. Admiral Vethkrol leaned forward, his expression changing from doubt to cautious hope. Not impossible, he said quietly. Just unexpected. As the Vigilant banked hard to avoid return fire, Jack felt the old ship responding to his commands with surprising agility. The battle had only just begun, but they had landed the first blow. Bring us around for another pass, he ordered. Let's show them what this relic can really do. The battle intensified as the Vigilant cut through space, weaving between enemy vessels with surprising agility. The ancient ship's hull glowed hot in places where energy beams had struck, but it continued to push forward, engines roaring. 3 enemy ships converging on our position, Officer Kim called out, her eyes fixed on the tactical display. "They're trying to box us in." Jack nodded calmly. "Helm, prepare for evasive pattern delta. Let's show them what human pilots can do." The Vigilant suddenly dived, rolled, and accelerated in a pattern that no combat eye would have calculated. The maneuver was born from human instinct and decades of naval combat experience, programmed into the ship's original flight systems. The enemy vessels, with their precise and predictable movements, struggled to track the erratic path of the human warship. Two of their energy beams missed completely, disappearing into the void. "Their targeting algorithms can't predict our movements," Lara observed. "They're used to fighting logical, optimized opponents." Jack smiled. "Sometimes being unpredictable is better than being advanced." "Mr. Alvarez, status on missile tubes." "Nuclear payloads armed and ready, Captain. Tubes 1 through 6 are green. Target the vessel to starboard, the one with damage to its forward section. Full spread." The Vigilant shuddered as 6 missiles launched in rapid succession, their engines flaring bright against the darkness of space. The enemy vessel attempted to intercept them with energy beams, destroying 2, but the remaining 4 struck home. The nuclear detonations were contained and directed by magnetic fields, focusing their destructive power against the crystalline hull. The enemy ship didn't explode, but large sections of its structure cracked and shattered, venting atmosphere and debris. "Direct hit," Alvarez shouted. "Target is crippled." A cheer went up from the crew, quickly silenced as the Vigilant rocked violently. An enemy beam had struck their port side, cutting deep into the armor. "Damage to decks 3 and 4, Foster reported from engineering. "Fire suppression systems engaging. Hull breach in Section 7. "Seal off that section," Jack ordered. "Redirect power to maneuvering thrusters." The Vigilant spun on its axis, bringing its undamaged starboard weapons to bear on the attacking ship. The railguns fired in sequence, each round punching through the enemy vessel's hull. On the diplomatic station, the alien delegates watched the battle unfold with a mixture of horror and fascination. What had seemed like a suicide mission was turning into something else entirely. "The human vessel has disabled 2 enemy ships and damaged 3 others," reported a coalition officer. "They're actually winning." Admiral Vethkrol's expression had transformed from skepticism to respect as he watched the tactical display. "Not just winning. They're showing us how to fight these invaders." Back in the heart of the battle, the Vigilant continued its dance of destruction. Jack had positioned his ship between 2 enemy vessels, forcing them to hold fire to avoid hitting each other. "Captain," Lara called out, "I've been analyzing their ship design. There's a recurring pattern in the crystal structure, possibly their power distribution nodes." She pointed to specific points on the enemy ship diagram. "Can you target those points specifically?" Jack asked Alvarez. "With the railguns, yes. Precision targeting." "Do it." The Vigilant's main guns adjusted their aim, focusing on the small nodes Lara had identified. When they fired, the effect was immediate and dramatic. The enemy vessel's lights flickered, and its movement became erratic. "We've disrupted their power grid," Lara said excitedly. "They're vulnerable." Jack didn't waste the opportunity. "All weapons, concentrate fire on that vessel." The combined assault of railguns, pulse cannons, and a final missile strike tore the enemy ship apart, its crystalline structure shattering into thousands of glittering fragments. "Enemy vessel destroyed," Alvarez reported, his voice steady despite the excitement of the moment. The remaining enemy ships began to adjust their tactics, trying to surround the Vigilant and bring their superior numbers to bear. But the human warship continued to move unpredictably, striking hard and fast before changing position. "They're learning," Jack observed as an enemy beam came closer to their engine section. "We need to keep changing our approach." Just as he spoke, the Vigilant rocked again as a direct hit struck their weapons array. "Railguns 2 and 3 are offline," Alvarez reported. "Missile tubes 3 through 6 damage." Jack gripped his chair as the ship shuddered around him. "Reroute power to remaining weapons." "We're not done yet." The diplomatic station erupted in cheers as the coalition reinforcements appeared on long-range scanners. A battle group of 20 warships had arrived, their captains having pushed their engines beyond safety limits after hearing of the attack. "The enemy fleet is retreating," Officer Kim announced, her voice filled with relief and disbelief. The tactical display showed the remaining crystal ships breaking formation, accelerating away from both the Vigilant and the approaching coalition forces. Jack leaned back in the captain's chair, finally allowing himself to exhale. The bridge around him showed signs of battle. Flickering consoles, the smell of burned circuitry, and the exhausted faces of his crew. "Damage report," he requested, his voice hoarse from hours of giving orders. "Hull integrity at 56%, Ben reported from engineering. "We've lost 2 of 3 reactors. Life support is stable but running on backup systems." The old girl took a beating, "Captain," but she held together. Jack nodded, pride evident in his tired smile. "Send repair teams to critical systems first. Let's make sure we can make it back to the station." The Vigilant limped through space, trailing small debris and venting coolant from damaged systems. Around it floated the wreckage of 3 destroyed enemy vessels and 2 more that had been disabled. Against all odds, the ancient warship had survived. As they approached the diplomatic station, Jack received an incoming transmission. Admiral Vethkrol's blue face appeared on the main screen. "Captain Harlow," the Admiral began, his tone formal but warm. "The Coalition owes you and your crew a debt we cannot easily repay. Your actions today saved thousands of lives." Jack nodded respectfully. "Thank you, Admiral. The Vigilant may be old, but she still had some fight left in her." "More than some," Vethkrol replied. "Our analysts are already studying the battle data. Your obsolete weapons were remarkably effective against an enemy that bypassed our most advanced defenses." 3 days later, Jack stood in the observation deck of the diplomatic station. Through the large windows, he could see the Vigilant floating in space, surrounded by repair vessels. Engineers from a dozen species swarmed over its hull, studying its design and systems while making repairs. "Quite a change from last week," Lara said, joining him at the window. "Now everyone wants to know how this primitive ship works." Jack smiled. People often forget that technology doesn't always move in a straight line. Sometimes the old solutions still have value. The door opened behind them, and Admiral Vethkrol entered, accompanied by Ambassador Zixthar and several other Coalition officials. "Captain Harlow," the Admiral said formally, "the Coalition Defense Council has reached a decision regarding the CSS Vigilant." Jack turned, standing at attention. "Sir, the Vigilant will no longer serve as merely a museum piece. It will become the template for a new class of Coalition vessels that combine elements of its design with our current technology." Ambassador Zixthar stepped forward, mandibles moving in what Jack now recognized as an expression of respect. "We owe you an apology, Captain, and perhaps a lesson in humility. We had forgotten that sometimes the old ways still have value." Jack nodded, watching as engineers began integrating some of the Vigilant's primitive technology into modern Coalition designs. Already, plans were underway to build ships with physical armor layers alongside energy shields and to deploy kinetic weapons alongside beam technology. "The Vigilant was never just a relic," he said quietly. "It was a reminder of where we came from and what humans do best: adapting, surviving, and finding solutions that no one else sees." A week later, as the diplomatic summit concluded, Jack received new orders. He would remain the Vigilant's captain, but with a new mission: to lead a mixed crew of humans and aliens in teaching Coalition forces the combat tactics that had proven so effective. As Jack walked the corridors of his ship, now bustling with activity as new crew members came aboard, he felt a sense of satisfaction. The Vigilant had not only survived its final battle, it had started a new chapter in Coalition history. In the shipyard beyond, construction had already begun on the first of the new hybrid vessels. Its name was displayed proudly on the hull: CS Alliance, the first of the Vigilant class.